Hello, ladies, and welcome to another episode of the Autoimmune Rehab Podcast, where you can find additional resources, show notes, video versions of this podcast, and more by going to autoimmunerehab.com. Now, today's topic is one that I have become more passionate about in the last year and a half, something that I've started to realize is a lot more important. And this is the topic of mobility strength training and how to create the perfect daily mobility routine. And part of this has been brought on by the fact that most of you, if you've read any of my blog, listened to some of my other podcast episodes, I've mentioned it, you know that I had to do a double knee surgery scope for repairing some pretty significant damage to my knees in March of 2022. And January prior to that, I had been to the ER because I had really severe pain. And the first thing that the surgeon said to my mom when he brought me out of the surgery room, and I was still asleep, so I didn't hear it, but he later repeated it back to me by saying that one of the reasons I ended up with the surgery and all my problems was because I sat too much and didn't do enough moving and enough stretching. And when I first started this podcast, it was probably about 6 weeks into this podcast. So you can go back and look in sometime, I believe it was like October of 2022. And I will actually link the episode below. I did an interview with a lady named Kim, who is a former owner of a physical therapy clinic, and she focused a lot on how stretching can improve your mobility, help improve your autoimmunity, help improve your wellness, all kinds of things. And so I have really started personally doing a lot more stretching and started to be really conscious and aware of how often I stretch. And in fact, I actually even have on my Oura Ring app, which Oura Ring is another topic that I addressed in another podcast episode that I can probably link below as well. It reminds me on my phone, alerts me every hour to stand up and stretch throughout the day. And, sometimes I don't quite listen to that, but I try to get up and do it and just move around, walk around, stretch. And I have also, in the time since then, become more aware of the fact that not stretching often enough and not standing enough and moving enough is the cause of a lot of our health issues. There have even been studies that have come out recently saying that sitting and not moving and just sitting around all day can actually be worse for you than smoking. And there's also a new Netflix documentary that's come out about the blue zones, and one of the things that they're talking about in these blue zones is how often all these people exercise and they move and they stretch multiple times through the day, and that's one of the reasons for their longevity and how they're able to live such long, fulfilled lives and stay healthy and well and all that kind of thing. So moving and doing a mobility strength training and routine is really, really important. And hopefully from this somewhat long introduction, you have become aware of the importance of it. And so what exactly am I referring to when I say like mobility and stretching? Let's start there to begin with, because some people might be a little confused by that. So a lot of people, when they think of stretching, think immediately of things like yoga or Pilates. And I know that that's something that I would have thought of prior to about a year and a half ago. And it's true that yoga, Pilates can play a role. And I do personally try to do an actual yoga class at least once every couple of weeks. But I found that sometimes stretching can be as simple as just getting up, standing up, going and touching your toes a couple times, just maybe standing against a door, moving, exercising, twisting around, your knees and your arms and legs, that kind of thing, for maybe even only about 5 minutes. And that can be a really good way to get in your stretching for that hour, 2 hours or so. Don't recommend that you go more than 2 hours without doing it for, a lot of the reasons I just previously discussed. And having this good mobility daily routine and mobility strength training can really, really help to prevent injuries. It can improve your posture, can give you enhanced performance when you do exercise, that kind of thing. And a couple of tips and resources that you can do to get started if you're struggling with this a little bit is, I know, for example, I have some picture cards for yoga that I got on Amazon, and I don't really use them to actually go through and do a whole yoga routine at home. But what I do is I will just kind of draw cards randomly and then just try to do that movement a couple of times to stretch myself as much as I can. Now, obviously, there are some yoga movements that, with my height and body and having had knee surgery, all those kinds of things, just can't quite get it to happen. But I just try to do it as much as I can. And there are also different DVDs, YouTube videos, different programs and things for stretching. And then the other thing that I find can be really helpful is to get like some kind of like a jump rope or some kind of like another rope or other kind of cord or something, kind of a lot like what they do when they take you to physical therapy. So, I still have the exercise list from the 6 weeks of physical therapy that I did after my knee surgery. And I will just take that cord or that rope, if you will, and use it to make myself stretch out my knees and my legs and arms and do some different exercises and things like that. And if you're really struggling with it, you can actually even do it. There are even exercises that you can do while you're lying in bed to get yourself to stretch. And there are a couple of things you want to think about before you get started doing the stretching. So the first thing you want to think about is what's your personal history with different injuries or different challenges with different parts of your body. And you want to push yourself, but you don't want to push yourself so far that you get hurt. So you want to think about that. You also want to think about where do you need to move? What is your work schedule like? What is your sleep schedule like? How many steps per day are you currently moving and stretching? And for example, if you're really only moving or stretching, maybe once a day during your lunch break, and then, a little in morning and evening, all of a sudden for me to come in and tell you that the perfect situation for your mobility routine is for you to start doing it every hour, that's probably going to be really excessive. So maybe you want to start with doing it every 3 hours, then go down to doing it every 2 hours, and then work on doing it every hour. And a little bit more than what you're currently doing can always really, really help. And I have found that the first thing that you really want to think about doing is you really should do a minimum of about 10 minutes of the stretching and moving in the morning when you first get up out of bed. Because the reality is that while you've been asleep in bed at night, you have, your muscles, your mobility and everything has been non-existent because you've just been lying there in bed. And yes, it may be true that if you're like me, you kind of rotate a little bit between your back and your side while you're sleeping, that kind of thing. So you may be moving around a little bit, but for the most part, you've just been lying there and haven't really moved or stretched. So you want to get that stretch going. And then I recommend, if you don't, want to use an Oura Ring or have some other kind of tracker on your phone or something to remind you, that you set up an alarm on your phone or you do something to remind yourself to get going, say to begin with every 3 hours, then like I said, eventually go to every 2 hours, then maybe eventually go to every hour, and just stand up and move and stretch around. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. It can only be 2 or 3 minutes. Personally, because my knees are my biggest area of focus, a lot of time for me, I will just get and stand up and start twist around a little bit, then just kind of move back and forth on my knees a few times and then sit back down and start working again. And then, like I said, I usually make a goal of doing some kind of an official yoga class about once every week or 2 weeks or so. And then I usually go swimming at least 2 or 3 times a week, and sometimes even more, sometimes swim up to 5 or 6 times a week. And then in addition to that, I like to do things like a variety of dance routines and Zumba routines, or maybe do stationary bike riding, treadmill, going walking, different forms of mobility to get that mobility, strength, and stretching going, because you just have to do that. And like I said, they've proven through research that people in the blue zones, which is these areas throughout the world where they have the highest quality of life for people and the highest percentage of people who live to be 100 years old or older, that they get up and move around and stretch a lot. So even if you feel like it's hard in the beginning, I would just take it slow and set some goals for yourself as to how frequently you're going to exercise and get busy doing that mobility and that stretching. And then just realize that you have to do it. And this is also another reason why, if you go to like the gym and say you do like a yoga class or a Zumba class for a whole hour, or kind of dance or anything like that, they always have you do some stretching and warm-up exercises before and afterwards. And the main reason that they do that is to help partly reduce pain as well, but also help with your body's mobility strength training. And a big part of that is stretching. So yeah, and so you just want to tailor your routine to your personal needs. You also want to incorporate it into your life according to how it works for you. And another tip that I found that can really help is, especially if you work from home, or even if you work in an office, you can potentially talk to your employer about this, is getting a stand-up desk in addition to your sit-down desk and rotating back and forth between standing and sitting. And that can really, really help a lot too. And if you're not convinced, then, not sure really how to help you. I would say the first thing would be to go listen to my interview with Kim from the strength stretching episode that I did, that I said I'll have linked below. But also the other thing, if you think about it, so I have a little 16-pound black schnoodle female dog, and she's 3.5 or so as the recording of this podcast, and she sleeps in her kennel at night, and she's about 16 pounds, and she gets out of bed, and I let her out of the kennel, and the first thing she does in the morning is start walking around and start stretching her arms and her legs. Now, why does she do that? Well, sure, she's been, cooped up a little bit in the kennel, but she also does it because she knows that it feels better for her to get up and start stretching her little furry arms and legs and her little paws. And so we need to follow that example of dogs and do it too, because just because the dog does it doesn't mean we have to do it. But in the case of stretching, it's a really good example for us to follow the routine of our dogs and get up and stretch just like they do. So anyhow, if you have any more questions about stretching, about creating a daily stretching and mobility routine, I invite you to reach out and let me know. Hopefully you found this information helpful. And if you would do me a favor and rate this podcast or review it, and also subscribe, because I will be having a lot of additional helpful tips coming. Hopefully you find all the podcast episodes interesting and helpful, but there will be some more specific ones that I have in the works that I can't really mention right now that are going to be really awesome. And so take care. I look forward to hearing from you. And like I said, hopefully this information has been helpful, and let's get out there, get busy, and get stretching.